I worked on the big takeover for Jackrabbit. He needed photographs every now and then, and one day he just said, "The Replacements are playing at the Café de Grand." So I watched them play and I photographed them. Just after the show, I thought I'd talk to them and see if I could take some photographs maybe afterwards or something. And so I was leaning up against the wall, and Paul started to go by me, and then he sort of like just looked at me, and he planted one on me. He just gave me a big old smack on the lips, and I just was, oh, I see. Hello. And that's how we met.
Why the Replacements?
Yeah, wow.
I think you should start.
That's a good question.
For me, just for me, so much of it is honestly just coming from Minnesota. I was walking down Hennepin in downtown Minneapolis, and I looked up, and Tommy Stinson was walking directly toward me. And, he just was looking like Tommy, with his hair is just red and big, and he's wearing like tight pants and Converse All-Stars, and looks like he just rolled out of bed, but looking 10 times better than I will like ever look. And he was walking toward me, and I kind of looked at him, and I looked away really quickly. And usually I have you like seeing kind of celebrities or rock people, whatever, but there's something about him. If I looked at him too long, I kind of felt like I would have been busted, because he would have known, he would have known like how I felt and how big they sort of were to me.
When you were a fan of that band, you lost your map, you lost your way, and you went somewhere else. You went somewhere else, and then you found your way back.
It's not for everybody, but if it's for you, it's a lifetime, and you'll never be rid of it. And I kind of wish that it was just common knowledge. Like, you don't have to convince a whole generation of people that Bob Dylan is the greatest songwriter that happened in that time period. You don't have to say it, it's just understood. And so it's, but it's fun to say it. It's fun to be one of the people who knows. And, if Dylan only sold 100,000 records, he'd still be Dylan.
Check 1, 2, it's all right. Check 1, 2, 2, 2, 2. Check 1, 2, 2, you got it. Check 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Check 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Check 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. Good. Check 1, 2, 2, 2, 2, 1.
So my first recollection of the Replacements was Peter Jesperson, who was I hate to use the word tastemaker, but he pretty much passed on a lot of his knowledge of music and pop music to the customers of Orfolk Joke Opus.
Brilliant record store. Not unlike High Fidelity, if you've seen that, though our store was even more funky than that.
Orfolk was kind of like the coffee shop. You didn't get coffee there, but everybody hung out there, looking through records, sitting on the windowsill, listening to tunes. There was an old bottle pop machine that you could, clank them out, and there was 10 cents, I think, a bottle, and it was a social, kind of like a social club,
In his position at the record store, people dropped off tapes, all the time, and I was there the day. I can remember it vividly. They had a little office in the back, and
At night, as he would go through the receipts to order for the morning's order, he would listen to demo tapes that he'd gotten in the day, and that was the first inkling we'd heard of anything about them, was that they were called the Impediments, which was what their first name was. I mean, he literally said, "You guys have got to come back here now and hear this."
Heard the tape and I thought, wow, these guys are really great.
I mean, Paul was no dummy, obviously, because he knew where Peter worked, and he knew he was the DJ at the Longhorn. He knew about Twin Tone.
If you were on Twin Tone Records, well, that was, what punk rock came out on in Minneapolis.
The Bataclan was open for a very short period of time, and they had, as one of their musical guests, was a band called the Impediments. And the Impediments were put off stage before they even got on because they brought alcohol into a non-alcoholic club. And I was actually doing lights for that particular event, and we ended up not having a show that night, which is the quote-unquote first Replacements show.
The Impediments name never lasted. They never even played a gig under that name. It quickly became the Replacements.
I think that the actual first one was the show at this halfway house. It wasn't really open to the public.
And I went to one of these sober dances at a place called Team House, and this must have been 1980. And there was a band playing called The Replacements. I remember thinking two things very vividly. First, that they were the worst band I'd ever seen. And second, that they were the best band I'd ever seen. I really couldn't figure it out, because that's the whole thing of punk rock, right? That it's bad, but it's so, so good. And they mostly played Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers covers. And Tommy was 13. And I remember also that he had a big pot leaf decal on his bass at a sober dance. Obviously a harbinger of things to come. But they weren't like good at playing their instruments, but there was something so unbelievably compelling about them that I was completely convinced from the first second that they were the best rock and roll band that I'd ever seen in my life.
Now, at a sober dance, were they?
Well, they only got to do their one set, because apparently there was an incident in the dressing room, an alcohol-related incident in the dressing room, and they weren't asked to return to finish the engagement.
In the late 70s, there was a bar downtown called Jay's Longhorn. And that pretty much was the epicenter of the Minneapolis punk scene. It was the bar where any national or international touring bands would play.
It was kind of like the Minneapolis CBGB, but cleaner.
I can recall the first time I saw him down at the Longhorn.
A lot of build up to the show and actually seeing them.
And that was their first public showing.
I get goosebumps thinking about it now.
They just, had this awesome energy.
I would remember literally going into the ladies' room, taking off my t-shirt and wringing out the sweat.
Each one of the four guys was so interesting to watch on stage.
All my favorite rock bands, it seems like the people in the bands are almost cartoon characters. They've each got a certain kind of personality.
In part because of the physical element of Tommy jumping all over the stage. He'd be like jumping 3 or 4 feet in the air.
That kid used to walk around with ankle weights during the days so he could work on his stage jumps.
Paul, reaching up to get to the microphone.
Paul kind of turning his thing when he played kind of sideways and pushing down.
And Bob had that sort of silly yet malevolent kind of like evil clown thing that he could kind of get going sometimes too.
And then there's Chris. I remember he just never seemed to play much in the way of fills, but he was like, it kind of reminded me of Rock'em Sock'em Robots the way Chris was playing.
It was loud. That's what it was. But it was a good loud. It was a different loud. It was a different thing that you hadn't heard before. Just them, because it had all the qualities of old time rock and roll, but had something new in it, and it wasn't necessarily like punk rock. It was something else.
Right.
So it was just very exciting to sort of see it when they still were basically in their innocence. Mm-hmm. And that's, sometimes a band never gets better than that. Sometimes they just don't get better than that.
It was reviewed in the St. Paul Pioneer Press, and that review said,
This is the best American debut by any band since the New York Dolls' first album.
There wasn't a bad song. It was like a Sgt. Pepper, like a punk rock Sgt. Pepper, you know?
My favorite rock and roll record ever.
I was just playing the shit out of it, wearing the grooves out, you know, it was just great. You know, I mean, I loved that album. And so I just said, I'm going to get their autographs. And each one of them signed a different name. Like, I think Westerberg said Reg Presley, and then Stinson went Billy Idol, and then Bob went Gobert Drone. And then the only one who signed their name normally was Chris Marr. So,
you know, what I really loved about Sorry Ma was reading the liner notes. They had those really funny liner notes, like that struck me as really self-depreciating in a way that I guess I hadn't really seen bands before. You know, I mean, like rock band, I always thought was supposed to be cool or something, and you know, their liner notes, I can't remember what song, but it was like, could have been better if we would have tried harder.
To hear a band with that kind of sense of humor, you know, was a really extra edge. I think it's one of the things that completely gets lost when people retell the story of what happened with punk rock. They all make it sound like it was so angry, it was so serious, and so, like, you know, full of outcasts who were, you know, wanted to express their distaste for society. Well, it was, all those things were part of it, but it was also a lot of people having a great load of fun and using black humor, a massive strain of black humor, to make people laugh at, you know, the foibles of stupid society.
Well, there's some great stuff on Sorry Ma, Taking a Ride. I mean, that's as good as anything they ever did, as good as anything anyone ever did.
That one never gets any respect, and that's such a good song. Like, that's unreal. Just the kind of urgent, like, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, the weird chord changes there, they just sound so, like, dissonant and so perfect.
And it's also a perfect guitar solo. That's the coolest thing Bob ever did on the guitar.
There is no song that does what Customer does to me. Describing what that song encompasses would take more words than the song takes. You know, you've got a class struggle going on there. You've got romance. You know, you've got teenage angst and frustration, all encapsulated in, I'm in love with a girl who works in the store, I'm nothing but a customer. And, you know, if you could sit down and write with such a word economy all the time, I mean, that would be heaven, wouldn't it?
The attitude of that first album is something that's kind of impossible to describe. It's something they could never capture again because it's completely born of a group doing it for the first time.
I saw him in the entry dressing room downstairs, and he was, you know, completely naked, and he was surrounded with shopping bags full of clothes. And Carly was down there with him, and she was kind of like pulling stuff out of a bag and holding it up, and he'd say, "No."
Okay, so Bob's wearing a tutu. Cool. That's what I expected.
Corduroy sport coat and a tutu.
A tutu.
I like the tutu.
He was wearing a Prince 1999 shirt, you know, and it was a child size small, you know, it was skin tight, purple tutu. And I don't remember what the footwear was, but, you know, that was a weird night.
Sometimes he'd be wearing no underwear under his tutu.
He wore a cape several times.
I know I saw Bob in a garbage bag. I may have seen him standing in a garbage can.
I do remember Bob Stinson standing in a garbage can.
Well, I think he had both a garbage can and a tutu on.
You know, there was this garbage can on stage, and all of a sudden, like, he was in it, and then he was, like, playing the solo, and I think it tipped over while he was soloing, and I don't think it really slowed him down any.
Dr. Seuss leotard. You know, the white cat in the hat, white and red stripes.
Wrapped, yeah, head to foot in tinfoil. Literally, like head to toe in duct tape.
I remember the diaper.
Kind of a longer, possibly knee length house dress.
Kind of like your church lady dresses.
He would do pirouettes in it while taking these really blistering solos.
Really ugly.
Yeah, he would look like fucking Carmen Miranda up there. And he had a really funny, you know, some people have just funny bodies. He's got a funny body, and lots of it would be showing.
And Bob comes out wearing a pair of overalls with no shirt on and a big foam cowboy hat like you'd get at the state fair. And during the encores, it's playing late, and he's smoking away. Well, he dropped a strap off his off his overalls and then dropped the other strap and was holding his arms out while he was playing. And Tommy ran behind him and pulled down his overalls, and geez, I had to be in the front row for it.
It almost seemed like, on some level, it was a drunken art project with Bob. The dresses and stuff, like it was performance art on some level.
It was about Paul and the band performing what they wanted to perform at the time. Not, I'm going to get this song out and I'm going to put this emotion to the song. It's like, I'm just going to have fun, and if I'm pissed off, I'm going to share my anger with the audience. Or if I'm having a fun time, I'm just going to have fun and I don't really care. And that I don't really care is the mantra. It is the I don't really care. We don't really care what you guys think. We're having fun. We're not here to entertain you. This isn't a spectacle. Even though it may be a spectacle, it isn't about being a spectacle. It's about us having a good time, getting through the night, making some money, so I can make tomorrow's rent.
I think that Stink is one of the 2 best American records ever made by anybody.
It's got beautiful emotion and raw energy in it.
The Stink record, which is like really rough and ugly and funny and genuinely seemed like they were like on our side.
That opening song, Kids Don't Follow, with the...
This is the Minneapolis Police, the party is over.
Oh man, that just blew my head off. I thought, this is so cool.
Well, it was a party, this rent party, for a guy by the name of Don Holshoe, who is a local artist. The police had come once and said, you know, you can't, you either, if the liquor's not gone, you know, we're going to close this place down. And so, of course, we just said, you know, hell with you, and, you know, we're just going to keep drinking. Either right after one of the bands played or right before, I think, we saw them, they came up the landing. But I'd recorded one of the other bands, and my machine, I looked over, and generally I would stop it and noticed it was still on pause. I had it in the pause mode. And then, I had it wired right into the PA with my other stuff. So when they came walking across the room, I thought, oh, I wonder if they're going to come to the mics. I thought, oh, they're going to come to the mics. So I just reached over and unpaused it, and my big moment in history.
You were at that party. How many cops were called for that? You remember?
Go. I remember being tons, but I think I just talked about it because I saw Don, and apparently he said there were only like 5 cops.
The big question too is that Dave Pirner saying "fuck you"? I don't know if that is or not.
I drove a school bus when I was 18, which is strange to think of in itself. But every Friday from that album, I'd have these kids in junior high, and if they were well behaved on the bus, I brought my boombox and I would play "Fuck School" really loud on Friday, and they loved it. I was their favorite bus driver for about 5 minutes there.
The first record hadn't sold all that great. We were still worrying about a lot of returns coming back. And to save corners, we thought we'd hand stamp the album jacket to save money on printing costs and jacket costs. Also, the novelty of a hand stamped cover, making a collector's item, and just, it kind of helps the myth and everything else.
There were, I don't know how many copies had come in, all blank. And so Paul just said, stamp it.
I actually took a plastic fork and put it on to do kind of a fake UPC code.
And the information on that originally was all done with potatoes, where we would put a potato on the ink pad and then put it on Stink. All the original red ones, I think, were all done with potatoes.
With the potato, what was that?
Somebody's old art background, I guess.
And you would carve the word "stink" backwards in a potato, and
stamped it in ink. And
who was carving?
You know, I can't remember.
But somebody was doing the potato carving. I was merely a potato letterer.
It might have been a competition where we all got potatoes and had to do it.
But, you know, it was just like any means to cut, you know, Twin Tone really didn't want to do the record, and especially after they had realized, you know, you do these EPs and all the costs are the same as doing an album, but you can't sell it for as much, so like it's a total, you know, money loser. Any way that we can cut corners to put it out.
What's your favorite replacement song?
Go.
the rumor that went around the neighborhood was that, you guys know how Tommy Stinson fucking quit high school? He went in there, man. He went into the principal's office with a boombox. He had a cassette tape with "fuck school" on it. He pressed play. He gave the finger to the principal. He fucking walked out. That was the story.
Tommy, Bobby's younger brother, he was both the mascot and the emblem of what they were. He was the actual teenager whose alienation and chaotic rebelliousness Westerberg was articulating and enacting.
Tommy was a kid, you know, he was 12 or 13, you know, and so there were, you know, problems with him playing bars and going on tour. And
Peter had to be a legal guardian so that he could go around touring the country and so on because he was underage.
You know, basically he grew up in rock and roll clubs, you know. Most of the time sitting in the dressing room, sometimes sitting in the van because the club wouldn't let him in except for, you know, when they were on.
Tommy was the rock star. All the girls in my school and all the surrounding schools liked him.
Girls used to stalk Tommy and just like make movies of him walking down the street.
Tommy was a little snot.
He was the sweetest little kid that you could ever imagine.
He wasn't like a popular kid.
He was the brat, but not a mean brat.
I think Tommy's the best bass player that I've ever played with, and I put him up in the ranks of like the 3 or 4 best in the world.
You know, I still listen to Replacements all the time, and his bass playing is one of the main reasons.
I think he and Bob played a 10-string instrument together.
Yeah, I remember the first time seeing him at the Longhorn, we were all kind of like, you know, like, who are these guys? You know, it's like, okay. You know, we were kind of obsessed with playing hard and fast, and these guys roll out and they're playing hard and loose.
They were clearly the two reigning kings of the hill.
They were kind of the Beatles and the Stones of American punk rock.
I think that within the sort of petri dish of Minneapolis music, that these guys fed each other. Yes, they were our rivals, but it wasn't nasty.
I think both bands wanted to see the other band as the second best band in town. One of the things that both bands did was get out and just demonstrate that you can just be yourself and play really great music and not be bothered by trends or you know, oh, I need to do this to be cool. It's like, no, you just go out and you just do your thing and you are cool. We didn't really give a shit about what anybody else thought about how we looked or what we sounded like. We were doing what we wanted to do.
Well, it took 2 years for them to finally make it to New York, and there was really nobody waiting in New York to see them. And there were about 100 punk rock kids there, and nobody liked them, absolutely nobody, because they didn't dress like punk rockers. There was probably about 6 of us really enjoying the show. Aside from that, a lot of hardcore kids with no hair on their heads, standing around with their arms folded, scowling like, grrr. I don't know who booked this. This is terrible. I want my $5 back. Give me my $5 back.
It seemed like they were a real gang, like they were a real band. There was something really going on with these guys, that they were having fun and didn't give a shit, and that was also part of it. But then underneath it, you could hear that there was some really catchy songs.
This record was made without anybody in mind, without any audience to cater to, without any record label to appease. This was music made purely for the love of making music.
I was more of a babysitter for the session than I was a producer for the session. Figuring out, if Bob was going to do his lead guitar, he was really good after 2 beers, but he got really bad after 4 beers. And just learning the idiosyncrasies of everyone, what worked and what didn't work and so on. And the band at the same time saw me as kind of the evil overlord, I think, and were trying to play games on us and so on. They were switching around on instruments and so on, pretending that I wouldn't know what was going on and stuff like that.
So I think Paul and maybe Tommy and Peter Jesperson were up in the DJ booth with me, and they were hanging out there after the gig started, and I was just playing records for the punks. And Peter handed me a test pressing of Hootenanny, which hadn't been released yet, and said, "Here, you know, since you're into the band and you like our first 2 records, here, have a copy of this." I was like, "Wow, unbelievable, great!" You know, "Hey, do you mind if I play a track from this? This is one of my favorite new bands, and it would be great to hear it here on this massive sound system." And Peter said, "Sure, we'd love it." And I said, "Well, I haven't heard it. What song should I play?" And I think Paul said, "Well, you can't go wrong with the first song." And I thought, like, well, of course, you can't go wrong with the first song. I mean, it could be like Kids Don't Follow, right? You know, this is obviously going to be this massive slam bang, great song. And I put it on, and of course it was Hootenanny. And I keep thinking, well, this is just the intro, right? I mean, this is going to get better, right? And the kids started booing, and I kind of kept glancing over and like, does this get started at some point? And they're just kind of giggling, and the kids are booing louder. I'm like, guys, I think I got to take this off.
That was the first record really to represent all of their sides, even the sides that didn't show up live, like, you know, Paul by himself.
Favorite song changes daily. If I have to go back to one, I keep going back to Heyday on Hootenanny. Yeah. And it's because, "Here's Bob!" That song in 2 minutes is everything that's great about The Replacement. It's one and a half great riffs hammered home with reckless abandon at a speed that is faster than it probably should be played at. I love that song. I love that song. Love that song.
I think it's the mix. I think it's the whole album. You know, it's that they're playful, they do an instrumental, then they do something with a drum machine, then they do this drunken cowboy song in the end.
Yes, I would go along with every grade, although casual listening to Hootenanny suggests that maybe it could be better than a B+. Yeah, I mean, yes, that's a real possibility.
It was like a club a little bit, you know, and Peter was like the club president.
I think it's, you know, certain that all of the Replacements, certainly, and probably most of all, Paul and Tommy got a musical education through Peter.
In Peter's case, I think he hit a happy balance of the illusion of the band controlling themselves while at the same time being the hipster or whatever that they would take his suggestions to heart and make them their own. Peter at his best could only give advice and tell them what he liked and didn't like and play records for them that he liked to get influences in and stuff. Show Paul, well, I like this because of this, and I like this because of this. And just hopefully it would absorb. Peter was a master teacher more than anything else. And as long as the students were willing to take his class, it worked out. In the case of the Replacements, they were a very good class for Peter.
Revelations about the Replacements for me were Paul's influences. He admitted that he liked Roger Miller. I says, "What is it? It's the wordplay?" And he goes, "Yeah."
And I remember a night at his house listening to Every Picture Tells a Story by Rod Stewart, and we were just all going insane, saying it was the greatest record ever.
Yeah, I went over to his place, and all he was listening to was Miles Davis. And I don't mean just like Kind of Blue, I mean like Bitches Brew.
Lots of T-Rex, of course, some Robin Hitchcock. I was exposed to Robin Hitchcock. I Often Dream of Trains was played incessantly.
Yeah. Tommy liked a lot of just, you know, top 40-ish kind of syrupy pop. He had the most pop sensibility of anybody in the band.
I talked to Bob probably the most of all of them because he was really friendly. He was into a lot of classic rock stuff and a lot of like sort of roots of punk kind of stuff. You could talk to him forever about sort of, you know, Stooges or like, you know, Dead Boys or something. But you could also talk to him forever about like Yes or something, or like sort of like Gentle Giant, or just like crazy prog rock stuff. It's like, you know, there was like that element of it too, which was like kind of like, wow, dude, you're like punk rock icon. You're telling me about Yes? It's like, are you kidding? Steve Howe's your favorite guitar player? But what's cooler than that? How can you be more punk rock than like being in this super punk rock band and your favorite guitarist is Steve Howe?
He definitely did not like, you know, what he called fluffy doodle music. You know, God forbid, you know, Mr. would come on while we were playing pinball or something. You know, he'd have to leave the bar. There's certain music that he just wouldn't allow his ears to, you know, take in.
None of them were alterno kids. None of them were, you know, listening to Black Flag and crap like that. In fact, frankly, they didn't have much use for that stuff. That, you know, they didn't have any interest in the political side of rock and roll. You know, they were a rock band. And, you know, in reality, they could have existed 20 years before or 20 years after.
It was one of those sloppy shows, you know, chaotic, the early hardcore mess. But at the end of the show, Westerberg did something that I will never forget. It was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. A rock star, which to me he was even then, playing to 150 people. There was a serious Mohawk contingent.
Me and my friends, I guess we were all about 13 or 14 at the time, same age as Tommy, and we were yelling stuff out. We had heard they did covers, or we were just heckling them. We were really into hardcore then.
And they were shouting out throughout the whole show whenever they could get a word in edgewise.
And we're yelling out, you know, songs like Ace of Spades. And
at the end of the show, they were done, and Paul decided he wasn't. So even though Chris and Bob and Tommy had left the stage, Westerberg called up these obnoxious Mohawk leather jacket wearing punk rockers.
And Paul was like, yeah, you think you could do better? Come up here.
And he went behind Chris's drums and then proceeded to play Louie Louie for another half hour. And I thought, you know, the Replacements. What a statement. Yeah. Westerberg is saying, you know, punk rock means anybody can do it.
I think the Replacements are actually a very ambitious band. And I know no one ever really talks about them like that. You look at their albums and the production values and how they conducted themselves on stage or in an interview, and it seems like they took a lack of ambition to almost like existentialist heights or something. You know, they're the most unambitious band in the history of mankind, and yet in their best stuff, it seems like Westerberg's trying to give you something. Their songs are trying to give you permission. You know, permission to be yourself. Yeah, the songs aren't financially ambitious or academically ambitious, but I think they're personally ambitious. They're emotionally ambitious. There's something about them that I actually think is strangely encouraging. And I think their best songs have this kind of risk.
There was a show at the Upper Deck downtown Minneapolis where the Replacements often played. It was memorable because it was the first time they'd ever played I Will Dare. You know, which in a way that was the song more than any other song that launched them into some other level. It's just kind of like some sort of lightning bolt coming out from the sky. And I think Peter was probably standing at the soundboard, because he usually did. And I was standing over, I think, to the left of the stage. And the very memorable, you know, beginning riffs of I Will Dare came on, and Peter looked over at me, and I looked over at Peter, and we were just, what?
Top to bottom, it's great. It covers so many musical genres. I would literally compare it to something like London Calling, where you look at a song like 16 Blue, compare it to Androgynous, compare it to Answering Machine, which I think has no genre. It's its own genre, right? You know, and then, you know, for those of us who go back a little bit longer with them, you've still got Gary's Got a Boner, and you still got Tommy Gets His Tonsils Out, you know. Favorite Thing might be my favorite song out there. I mean, I've just rattled off the names of these songs. I mean, that album is well nigh perfect.
It was like this huge leap forward in terms of the sound, the songs, the fact that the Replacements were covering Kiss. You know, that was a complete mindfuck as an irony. You know, because, you know, the world of the Replacements was the world of like hipper than thou indie rock. Yeah. And Kiss was exactly the antithesis of that. And so the fact that the Replacements deemed themselves so either not cool or so cool that they could cover Kiss without any fear of embarrassment, you know, I thought that was amazing. And, you know, that album started to make the meld of kind of real ferocious power and real heartfelt sentimentality and, you know, vulnerability and emotional resonance. And that as a grown-up, which I was at the time, was much more potent than, you know, than just screaming in your face.
If there wasn't a song like Tommy Got His Tonsils Out, you know, you wouldn't think Answering Machine was as great as it was, because you needed that parallel and that contrast to see how great they were. And you needed the shows where they fell over on stage because, or else, you know, you wouldn't have known that they were the greatest band maybe to ever exist.
The other records are really good, but Let It Be is just something else. It never stops. The songwriting is amazing. I don't think that there's a single subpar song on the entire record. It's only 34 minutes long.
My favorite Replacements song is I Will Dare.
I Will Dare.
I Will Dare.
It's almost shameful to say I Will Dare, but it's so obviously a brilliant song.
Gary's got a boner.
Tommy Gets His Tonsils Out. I still think Unsatisfied is probably my favorite song because it's such a monster. I think it's, if I was Paul Westerberg and I had written that song, I would not have known what to do with it because it would have been like, oh, I'm blasphemy here. Sam Cooke writing A Change Is Gonna Come. When he finished it, he had to know. He had to know that what he had written.
I can't listen to that song without bawling.
It's about America. It's about having everything and yet not being happy with it or not being able to take it or make it your own or be part of it. I mean, and they were a band for people who didn't feel part of things.
That was almost me to my parents, you know, like, or to the world, to anybody that I knew. Like, are you serious? You're satisfied with this? Like this, just nothing happening to you, you know, getting caught up in the cycle of the middle.
It's a song that is, you know, oddly comforting, yet about being unable to be comforted. And when Paul is shrieking, and when that vocal's cutting through a really nice melody, that's what the Replacements are to me. It's that combination of the rage and the comfort.
It's pretty much the Apocalypse Now of vocal performances.
And just the audacity, and I mean, people go, why'd they name it that? And because I remember Jesperson was just, you can't name a record that. And I'm like, why not? You know, I mean, that kind of shows you where they were at. I mean, they weren't really a punk band, which people that don't know them, I think, have kind of confused that. But that was a pretty punky thing to do, you know.
The picture of them on the roof like this. I stared at that picture like I was a 16-year-old kid again, looking at a, Beatles album covers. And, it's just like, I had done that, man. We climbed out the window on the roofs and drank lukewarm beer and talked about what we were gonna do.
You can hear that this is a band that with a little more polish would become something commercial, and that they hadn't polished it. And it's just that cutting edge, and it's probably the edge a band is on and they can't stay on that edge. Once you do that record, you have to go one way or the other.
They never made a good album to me after Let It Be. And I think, my theories about that are it has everything to do with business and has everything to do with what effect their modest level of success had on Paul's brain.
And this is 1984, October. He starts the letter off by saying, "Dear Samishta, don't drop over in disbelief, but it's me. I've gotten your swell letters and neato cards and have enjoyed the piss out of them. If I said I was too busy to write, that would be untrue. I was a little afraid to drop you a line. Why? And I'm not going to tell you that bit." But then he goes, now that that's out of the way, hi, we've been on tour for 2 months. We are coming to make a stand in the West. First leg of our spree of crime will be Friday, October the 26th at the Club Lingerie. From there, who knows, but I'm looking forward to seeing you. You'll know me. I'll be the one that smells like a rhino. Paul.
I remember the Stinson boys were at the bar, and my buddy, I didn't want to bother him. My buddy Brof went over and was playing them with alcohol and talking music and whatever. And I was beginning to wonder, how can they play? How can they walk, let alone play a musical instrument? They were pretty drunk, and the show was supposed to start at whatever time, and it was an hour and a half later, and it hadn't started. And now the crowd's pretty drunk, and it packed and hot. It was in the grotto, was in a basement, aptly named. And then they came out, and they were wasted. And it was weird because, you know, that was the time, and I never mentioned it because the fight broke out on stage. They were arguing, and you could tell Bobby was having a real hard time, and Paul was getting really pissed at him and screaming in the middle of the songs. And then he started, you know, kicking. And it escalated and escalated, and then it got to they had a fight. And I remember too, because it ended like a Mike Tyson fight. There they go. Well, you know, they're gonna go have it out, and then no, it was over. And my friend's going, "That's rock and roll. That's rock and roll." And I didn't voice this. I never vocalized it, but I thought, no, it's sad. They're great. They're too good to be that drunk. And I remember Chris Mars vividly, as the nonsense was going on. I remember him not being, you could tell, okay, you know, one of these nights, you know, okay, it's you know, I remember, you know, the fight starts and they're pushing each other and the amplifiers are being knocked over and stuff's happening. And I remember him putting his sticks down, and the dressing room was just off the stage right, and there he went.
He was the quiet one who was thoughtful and kind of knew what was going on. You didn't have to explain things to him. You told him what you wanted done, he knew why, while the others would argue.
Chris Mars was a really, really great drummer. I think he's like kind of underrated as that.
And he was just such a normal, quiet guy.
Quiet and humble and an unbelievable artist.
He might have been a better sketching artist than he was a drummer.
Forgive me, Chris. Chris Mars. We used to hang out, when we'd all hang out, they were like, well, is Chris around? Chris would apparently like report back to everybody back in Minnesota, so everyone called him Topaz, like he was like the spy. And that would be our big joke of the night, like, oh wait, is Chris around? Shh. Like, yeah, we drink too much, whatever, it's gonna get reported right back to everybody in Minneapolis, so we have to be careful.
Well, he was obviously the least intoxicated, maybe, I don't know, or the most capable of playing while drunk.
The Village Voice was kind of the beacon. They set the tone for music journalism coverage with, you know, Bob Christgau.
He discovered the Replacements and loved it, and actually just called to say how much he loved it, which, you know, it's like, whoa, here we go.
I remember being angry. I remember being with my core of fanzine writers at CBGB, and all of a sudden Chris Gow's at the show, and John Perellas from New York Times is at the show, and the guys from Musician Magazine, Bill Flanagan's at the show, and you're like, fuck you guys, man. Where were you when with Hootenanny? You know, now let it be, and you're on the train.
Well, then I got a call from R.J. Smith. You know, he called me up one day and said, you know, I'd like to go on the road with the Replacements. And we were just, okay, you sure you want to do that?
Yeah, I definitely remember him saying, are you sure you want to do this? Do you know what you're getting into? And, you know, I mean, you can sort of guess from the music, but really I didn't. I had no idea what I was getting into. I mean, there's a lot of dispute about that since the article came out, where people have said, well, they've said in later interviews that they really didn't drink before shows, that they weren't the kind of drinkers that I depicted them as. I quoted them, I held up a mirror to them, and I know I was the first person to really do that. And I think that kind of surprised them, what they saw in the mirror, maybe.
The Replacements were not well known when the Village Voice put them on the cover. You know, they'd toured at that point almost none. You know, it was, for the Village Voice to do that, it was just unheard of at the time.
Certainly rocked our world. You know, there at Twin Tone, we'd never had a band that had that kind of attention.
Right. No one touched them in terms of guilelessness, in terms of openness, in terms of for reporter access, because they didn't know any better, and because they were such wonderful human beings. And for a band that's so self-destructive and so, in many ways, lacking in confidence in terms of not wanting to make it easy for you to see who they really were, there was an incredible confidence in Westerberg, and never, ever, I don't think, saying, that's off the record, you know, or Jesperson coming in and saying, okay, guys, ever. I mean, they may have regretted it.
If you're driving into town and they're on the cover of the Village Voice, I mean, Peter and I were kind of excited. The guys in the band are like, you know, where are we staying tonight? Where are we going to get some booze? I mean, it was meaningless to them.
It also was the poorest selling issue of The Voice that year.
Would it have happened without us? Probably. They're pretty good. You know?
You could go see them on one night and they'd be blindingly brilliant, close to a religious experience. You could go see them on another night and they could just be complete dog shit. And they played at CBGB's as Gary and the Boners. I think the cover charge was maybe $5. Place was packed.
You could tell right away it was going to be, you know, one of those shows. After about a half hour into it, we could kind of see where it was going, and it's like, hey, want to go get some pizza? You know, I tell people that now, and they're like, you left that show? You know, and it got so bad. I heard tapes of it later, and the band would start up a song, and Paul would purposely sing different lyrics to different songs. And, you know, and it's like, we'd seen him do that. It's like, been there, done that, you know. But the people in New York were, you know, they talk about it to this day like it's, you know, one of the most amazing gigs ever. And for us, we're like, it's just another kind of crappy replacement show.
But you'd hear stories too. That was the point. You'd run into guys at college or in your travels where people would say, I saw him in St. Louis, you know, and a fight broke out or whatever, you know. Or they were great, or they were awful, or whatever. But you'd always be, what happened? What happened at the replacement show? What they open with? What they cover?
They get on stage and they ask for what to be played, and somebody always yells out customer or fuck school, and it's like, yeah, maybe, but you know, if you threw out something crazy that, you know, clam bake or who knows what it might be, and it sparks something in one of them, and they just start doing it, and they all fall in together, and they kind of pick it up, and they play, you know, the first verse and the first chorus, and then it falls apart. That, to me, is what rock and roll is, and that to me is where the magic occurred with that band. It wasn't the fact that they could put together great songs. They could do that, but lots of bands can do that. It's very difficult for a band to be willing to fall flat in their face and get up and do it again and again and again. That right there is what makes me go, these guys are great.
I mean, they were a great cover band in a way that very few other bands, contemporaneous bands, were. Really, none.
See, I match pharmacological states with them a lot of the time, so I think there was a White Christmas cover.
Misty Mountain High. The Boys Are Back in Town.
Jailbreak.
Hitching a Ride.
Battleship Chains by the Georgia Satellites.
Hello, Dolly comes to mind.
Heartbeat to Love Beat.
It's the T-Rex, 20th Century Boy.
My favorite ones I used to do was Substitute.
There's been about 20 bands who did Another Girl, Another Planet, and no one did it as well as the Replacements.
Prince cut. I could never take the place of your man.
They were really going through a Radar Love phase.
Typically, they would get through a verse, chorus. They'd get to the bridge, and it would all just collapse and fall apart. And then they'd laugh it off, start up another song.
Every time they fucked something up, they would play Help Me Rhonda. And then just like play a bar of it, and then move on to the next song. And if that song fell apart, it was right back into Help Me Rhonda.
Oh my God,
that's great. They must have played that 9 times over the course of the night.
And the Replacements, they were just a band that was about whatever song they were playing.
So you go back, and they synthesized so much of what was great about rock and roll. And you go back to the Shit Hits the Fans, and then they're doing like Civil War era, you know, like folk songs, right? You know, No More the Moon Shines on Lorena or whatever. I don't even know where that comes from.
The Shit Hits the Fans is one of the greatest album titles in history.
We're playing a place that is pretty much wound down. Spring break is either occurring or it's right around when there's nobody in this particular college town, and this particular location happens to have nobody visiting it. So there's very, very few people in the audience. And if you listen to the tape, you can hear Paul ask for the people to move closer. They don't gotta, but he really wants it to be more intimate because they really enjoyed that wall of people in front of them. They're sweating, the audience sweating. They really preferred that. Anyway, I'm mixing the show, and this particular location is a big square room and has a balcony above me. And I decide that I'm going to walk around and listen to the show and see what I hear. And I walk up, and, you know, anytime a show is being recorded, you know, the objective is to stop that from occurring. Bootlegging is not acceptable. We're taking that. And I happen to confiscate this tape from this guy. You know, where it ends is where it ends, beautifully. And we listen to it on the way home. And while we're listening to it, Chris starts to draw a drawing that it turns into the cover art for the tape, the cassette. And we get back to Minneapolis, and I've got this cassette. I give it to Steve Felstead. He masters it over onto some bigger tape, and then from there I get the cassette back, and when I get it back, it's being listened to by Paul, and it gets a little actual erasure in it, and it's a story where I mean, my part is pretty insignificant. I mean, in all honesty, I happen to pick up a cassette from somebody who was making a tape of the show, and it happens to sound really good. You know, it just happened.
And when Bill gave me a copy of When the Shit Hits the Fan, I said, "You recorded this, didn't you? You saved this for posterity. I hope you know this is going to probably eclipse their entire catalog as what people will talk about." And they say, "Oh, you saw the Replacements? God, I wish I saw the Replacements." I would like to remember them instead by the good dozen shows I saw where they were just blowing people away.
That held a picture up to them too of who they were, and they heard it and they liked it and they put it out because they said, yeah, that's us.
You know, one person's entertainment is another person's, you know, somebody making a fool of themselves. And, you know, they weren't afraid to, you know, challenge that border.
For no reason other than we couldn't get to the facility in time, or we just didn't want to take the time to do a sound check. Sound checks were not done. But at the same time, it was really kind of like, you know, we don't need to do a sound check. We know what we're going to do. And it's like, you know what? I'm fine with that. Mm-hmm. If you don't care about the first song coming off with vocals, I'm cool.
Every gig that we played, get there, you know, get it all set up, try my damnedest to tweak it and get it to sound right. It didn't matter, because as soon as they got there, it's, you know, they were balls to the wall. That whole 11 thing.
You know, it's performance art. You get in there, swim, throw you off the boat in the middle of the lake, swim to shore. You'll figure it out. If you don't, you'll drown.
For both those tours, I think every night I got fired from the stage. Paul would go, "You're fired," you know, because they couldn't hear, you know, they were so friggin' loud that Paul couldn't hear his voice, and that's always a problem for singers. After that happened, every night, Bob would come up and put his arm around me and go, "It's gonna be all right. Everything's gonna be all right."
At that point, I had, you know, Clash records and Ramones and you know, all the college radio top 20 types of soundtracks going on, and I'd never heard of the Replacements. Tom came over and was like, "Hey, Carlene, there's this guy at the bar that really wants to meet you." I went over, and there was Bob sitting in a booth by himself under the porthole at the Uptown in the back booth. He you know, he was really sweet. He just started asking me, like, where I grew up, what I did for a living, and he told me that he was a pizza cook. And so that's all I knew about Bob. We dated for like 3 weeks. We'd go to the matinees, we'd go fishing, we'd walk around the lakes. And then, I don't know, he called me at work and he says, "My band's playing at First Avenue and I'd really like you to come. I'm going to put you on the guest list." And I said, "Well, you mean at 7th Street Entry? You know, no one plays the main room unless they're like huge." And he goes, just be there, you know, just show up with your ID and you'll get in for free. And drove down to First Avenue. And as I got up there, I saw the Doors had sold out show. So I opened the doors, handed my ID to the gal, and sure enough, I was on the guest list. At which point I got inside and I look up at the stage and there's my Bob. There's my pizza chef on stage to the sold out crowd, and I'm like, wow, what is going on? And when I walked in, he swung his guitar behind his back and he motions like this for the crowd to like separate. And then he's like doing this. He's like pointing at me and then coming, you know, come, and the crowd to do this, you know. Sure enough, the crowd just like opens up. I walk like, you know, in the Charlton Heston movie when the Red Sea opens. He insisted from that point on, every show that I saw them play, that I stand in front of him, so that it was personal. He played to me.
The venue was this giant, crazy warehouse. I think at one point it was a supermarket warehouse for food.
So there was a lot of people there, almost a sold-out show, and a $10 ticket, unheard of at the time.
The bartender in the back bar was Jon Stewart of The Daily Show. And I used to call him Back Bar John.
So I went to the back of the hall, grabbed a beer, realized I didn't know anybody there, so I figured I'd go over to the pinball machine and kill a little time before the replacements came on. Threw a quarter in the machine, and this scruffy dude came up to me almost instantly. As soon as the quarter left my hand, he came up and said, "Hey man, can you spot me a quarter for a game?"
So replacements came up. They went on late because they couldn't find Bob.
About the third ball out of 5, the lights go down, which is the signal that the band's coming on. So I said to the guy, "Hey man, thanks for the game. I'm going to go watch the band." And he turned to me and grabbed me by the arm while he's playing and said, "No man, you got to stay. We got to finish this. We started this game. We got to finish this game." As I'm looking up at the stage, I recognize that it's a trio, and I don't recall them. And my brother told me about the band, that they were a trio. But anyway, I'm still playing with this crazy guy, and he's rocking it. A second song goes by, and all of a sudden you can hear people talking in the crowd, like there's sort of a mumble going on. And I also noticed that people around the room are looking at us, looking at me and this weird-looking guy, disheveled hair, playing pinball. Finally, this guy's final ball drains right down the middle, and without missing a beat, as soon as the ball fell, he just turned to me and in one fell swoop said, "Thanks, man. See you later." And off he went. He walked right through the middle of the crowd, walked to the right side of the stage, and tried to get up on the stage. And I saw Westerberg come flying over to the side of the stage and actually kick up his foot and push him back off the stage. And this guy I was playing pinball with tried that 2 or 3 times, and each time Westerberg, I think once he clocked him in the forehead, once in the shoulder, and finally Westerberg gave up and went to the other side of the stage to finish the song. And the guy I was playing pinball with jumped up on stage, grabbed a guitar, and played like the final 3 chords of that third song.
Mhm.
That's when I realized I was playing pinball with the guitar player from the Replacements.
They didn't really do many of their songs that went into one of those shows that I guess they've been known to do.
It was a totally straight show, and everybody walked out feeling personally betrayed.
People were booing. I mean, people were pissed off.
They played all the songs from start to finish.
I liked the show. I'll tell you why. Because yes, it was on the verge of absolute chaos and collapse.
People were just disappointed. I think there were a lot of people at that show that were coming expecting to see the circus, and they didn't get the circus.
People started calling the college radio station. If I was at the replacement show tonight, they really sucked. And of course, I called on the phone like an idiot.
I think he reacted emotionally to what happened there. I know he loved the band.
And I started saying things like, yeah, they were assholes. Yeah, they were jerks, and they really, they sucked. And, I'm sorry if you spent $10 for that garbage. I was talking like an asshole. What happened was, though, they were in their van going to their hotel, and they were listening to me as the promoter say all these things over the radio. I hear there's a song written about that whole that shooting dirty pool. Is supposedly, I heard it's about me. I know it says rock and roll loudmouth in there.
Right around that time is when I started to maybe lose my affinity for the Replacements culture and the fans and stuff like that, because it started to remind me of the people who cheered while they threw Christians to the lions.
I know it was announced on a Warner Brothers conference call that we had signed the Replacements. There was a lot of whooping and hollering. The people I worked with back in the day, they were pretty musically astute, so I think there's a lot of excitement from the field staff, to have the band on the roster.
Mike Hill, the A&R person at Warner Brothers, called me up and asked me if I would be interested in working with the band. And I said, very much so. I set to work immediately to bring them into a more professional kind of attitude. They got my style pretty quickly, that we were going to work, that we weren't going to party.
I mean, even though the Replacements were very dysfunctional and very, messed up, they were they were much more sane than the Ramones were.
When we were making the record, I was very much concerned because at the time there was a fad of making the drums sound very loud and very echoey, and I purposely wanted to avoid anything like that because I didn't want the record to ever sound dated.
When that came out, I remember thinking like, hey, it's got a terrible cover, and I was put off by the artwork immediately. It was on a major label, so I was put off by that immediately. And the production to me is just not, I mean, I'm used to it now, I don't really think about it, you know what I mean? But at the time, I just remember thinking like, what are they doing? This doesn't sound like them. It sounds like a major label record.
Maybe it was around that Tim album that they sort of, in my eyes anyways, kind of stopped being the band from the basement, and started being a real band. And to me, those records are a lot less interesting.
I think Paul very much wanted to not make a punk record. And as a matter of fact, I think he willfully always kept turning the amplifiers down. I think which might have frustrated Tommy, who was very much wanted to turn the amps all the way up. What we did with Bob was we got him to show up. And while we had him there, we just turned the tape machine on and recorded him doing solo after solo after solo. Bob was brilliant. I mean, he was a brilliant guy. I think he was kind of against the major label situation.
To him, true rock and roll was the entry. Playing to the entry holds 187 fucking people. That's what he liked, where you can touch people, be right there, share drinks, and it's hot, sweaty, dark, rock and roll. He wanted to stay in the entry forever.
It's great to have Bob be Bob and play the way Bob does. No one ever could play like him. But when you're writing, now once you're starting to write songs like Kiss Me on the Bus, there's not a lot of room for him in that backdrop.
I played this solo to Kiss Me on the Bus.
Because I think Bob himself was never really happy with the way he sounded on that, because I think they did a lot of pasting and messing with his solos that made them sound more kind of crunched.
I took the opportunity while I had the chance of just go. We went from song to song. He laid down all these solos and everything. And then he was gone.
How many days do you think he was actually there?
1.
Everything that you like about every modern band that you like right now, you can find in a record called Tim.
The most impressive thing is that the songs really do shine through this kind of terrible sheen of bad 80s production.
Bastards of Young, come on. Like, that's an anthem. If ever there was an anthem, Bastards of Young is that anthem. Being misfits, not fitting in, but then not being a misfit because there's so many other misfits. It's like we'll all band together and we'll be the family we never were or never had.
Not that I suspected, somebody like Paul would, watch primetime television, sitcoms, but I was thinking, Here Comes a Regular, might have somehow, I know it was about a very specific club in Minneapolis with his buddies, but I thought like the line, Here Comes a Regular, call out his name. I told them that might have been subliminally, from Cheers, from Norm.
Because a lot of our punk upbringing was all about, obviously, fighting against the establishment and what we'd been brought up to be. And to me, a regular was kind of, especially in the old British sense of the word, was kind of, a permanent fixture, literally a permanent fixture of a place. It's a drinking hole.
You heard that song and you knew it was, you could see the CC at 11 in the morning. I quit drinking myself about 25 years ago, so I seldom go in there anymore. But I would say that when you heard that song, it reminded me of when, personally, I was in the throes of alcoholism, and you know, you would go in there at 11 o'clock, and how depressing it was. You know, there'd be guys that went in there that every day, you know, to get their opening, you know, their shots to wake up, and just the sort of camaraderie that evolves around alcohol, and how false, not false, what's the word I'm looking for? It's sad, in my opinion.
I don't work on that many records, so it was really gratifying, you know. You know, when the record came out, it was voted, at the time, the second best record of the year. To me, every song is very different. Every song is like a jewel.
At the same time, you know, it was really fascinating to see, you know, why did they name that record Tim?
I essentially end up on the ground asleep at the mic. You know, not enough sleep the night before, maybe drinking. But at any rate, I'm a heap on the floor with the mic in my hand, and the band continues to play, and the singer's passed out on the floor, and everybody leaves. And the band just kept playing. They played the whole set, and the basement clears out. It had been full. People were down there to see DKV play. And only 2 people sat and watched the whole set, and it was Paul Westerberg and Tommy Stinson. What was interesting was, shortly after that, hearing that they had named a record Tim because of this show that they had seen where the singer was passed out on the floor through the whole set.
So you are Tim.
I am Tim.
It just seems like at every turn the Replacements did shoot themselves in the foot. And if you talk about the video for Bastards of Young, that's a perfect example. Here they've got this chance. They could, you know, they could deliver it, and it's not like the band lacked personality when you saw them live, or plaid pants. They could have definitely done something visually pretty interesting, and instead they shoot a speaker for 4 minutes.
They found the loophole in their contract that said they didn't have to appear in their music videos, so they didn't.
Kind of brilliant, kind of dumb. Kind of the Replacements.
I'm guessing they were all sitting around drinking, and Paul probably made the suggestion, and I think I've been told that was the story. Well, we just go get the tapes. He kind of was playing around with the idea, once a record comes out, he would like to have all the old records disappear. You know, he'd like to have them self-disintegrate, so people wouldn't have the old stuff to compare with. He only wanted people to listen to his new record. Then when he put out the next record, that one would disappear. He would have loved, if the technology had allowed that, he would have really liked that. The idea that Twin Tone had old recordings that maybe we could put out or something like that, as it turns out, they came over and we had very unsecure things for the tape library, which is backups. And what they stole were backups. They didn't steal anything original.
Hometown boys make good. The whole world in Minneapolis stopped at that moment because it was like the Twins in the World Series or whatever, and they were so great.
I was at the biggest dance club in town, the First Avenue thing,
And
and they stopped everything and put them up on the
Wow,
big screen
that's the first time I've
for
heard that.
just the performance, and then we'll cut right back out. So you didn't see any of Saturday Night Live except here's the Replacements.
I saw them on Saturday Night Live doing Bastards of Young, and just thought just immediately thought, wow, this is the best rock and roll band I've seen in a long, long time. You know, everything about them, the look of them, you know, that they were just, there was no look. You know, they just looked like a bunch of guys hanging out, you know, in a local bar.
When they played on Saturday Night Live, I was in college, and I was home for some reason at my parents' house, and I remember my mom saying, "Oh, this band is terrible. Your band is better than that." And I said, "No, we're not. This is the most important band in the world." And I think I stormed off and wrote my mom this angry letter about why, and then I closed with, you know, the lyrics to "Bastards of Young," which is kind of a harsh thing for a kid to do to their parents, all because she didn't understand their beauty and wisdom on that Saturday Night Live performance.
The studios had given, I think, a dozen grocery bags filled with submarine sandwiches, brownies, fruit. By the time the show was over, they had pretty much dismantled those 12 bags of food and had, flushed the submarine sandwiches down the toilet and smeared the brownies all over the walls and smashed the bananas into the couch and the carpets and ceilings and lamps. And
the fact that they destroyed a Saturday Night Live dressing room to the point where it had to be rebuilt makes them my favorite band even more. That's what you want your rock bands to do.
And they got banned, and which is better than just not being asked back. It is almost impossible to get banned from there. I mean, I've hosted it 3 times, so that says it all right there.
What I love is that this is a band that was kicked off Saturday Night Live. Saturday Night Live was the home to drug addicts and drunks. And I mean, think about it. It was built with these guys that were the rock stars of comedians, that were out of control and excessive. If you're a band that gets kicked off of Saturday Night Live or banned from Saturday Night Live, you've done some things. And for my money, you've done them right.
And so when I hosted it later on, I remember one of the times Tupac Shakur was my musical guest. And, it was a time when Snoop Dogg was on trial for murder, and they were waiting to see if Snoop could fly out and sing with him that Saturday night. And Suge Knight was there and a bunch of badasses, and they were telling all these stories, everybody was scared. And I said, I had a friend here once that played on here, and he took a shit in an ice bucket and sent it down to the first floor where the tour comes up. And they were suddenly, like, these gangbangers were scared shitless that was something that Bobby Stinson had done, allegedly. And it was so funny because up till that point they were just super tough, but then they hear that story, they're like, oh my God, that is fucking white boy fucking gangsta right there. We wouldn't even consider that. That's insane.
Fuck Art. You would have kicked Bob Stinson out of your band too.
Oh no, I think if you're in a band with Iggy Pop, you realize, yeah, this is hell to live with, but this is brilliant, and it's not going to be brilliant without Iggy Pop.
All of a sudden, there was somebody that was too fucked up to be in the Replacements.
Thinking that Bob wasn't good enough. I was pissed off when they did that. And it was so symptomatic of them going downhill to me that they needed a better guitar player. You're not the Replacements without Bob Stinson. I don't care how often he gets drunk.
Not knowing what he's going to do, not knowing how drunk he was going to be or act drunk. I'm convinced half the time he acted drunk more than he was.
Insofar as there was this sense of contained chaos about the Replacements, well, that was Stinson's doing. It was Westerberg containing Stinson.
Without him, I don't think the band would have made it either in the early years. I think with the press was picking up with the misfit image and all that, Paul Westerberg wasn't a misfit. He certainly acted out his role in a band of misfits. But Bob was kind of the instigator on that kind of stuff, and a lot of press was written about the Replacements because of things Bob did. And I think Bob was very aware of it and was purposely doing it. It's not something organically that just came out. I think there's a lot of thought behind some of that stuff.
By the third time that it happened, for there to be no forethought, it would require an incredible accident.
Bob was the id of the band.
After Bob Stinson, it's like, I liked Tim a lot. I thought that was a good record. And after that, it's just like, well, I don't really see the point. It became too much like college rock for me.
Sometimes he'd go somewhere musically that was like Sun Ra or something, The guitar playing could get real weird for a few seconds in a way that still blows my mind.
It was him hitting the wrong notes at the right time.
No punk rockers played those chords.
He was a really underrated and brilliant guitarist.
Bob used to pat himself on the back when he pulled off a good solo, too. That was one of his things. He'd go,
That night, they all came over to our house, and for some reason, Bob Stinson stole all this meat out of our freezer. What the hell did he want frozen steaks for? What was he gonna do? Cook them in the radiator? It made no sense. But we saw him leaving, and he stuffed all this meat, and we were just like, It's the dude from the Replacements. What are you going to do?
The thing that I really remember about Bob was just that gentleness, that kindness. He didn't really seem like he belonged in this world.
Excuse me. It always makes me sad to talk about him, because I really miss him.
I know that he wanted the musical direction to stay loud, hard, and fast. And it seemed like the more corporate America got their claws into the Replacements, the more the band was turning to what he would consider fluffy doodle, you know, and he really didn't enjoy fluffy doodle music. You know, he didn't want to play in a Mr. band. He wanted the Replacements to stay true to who they were, and I think he started to feel like he was losing his voice.
I think that they're kind of martyrs a little bit, self-made martyrs, and while they attempted to clean up their act in the end there, I think the evidence suggests that we're all the better for it, that they continued to shoot themselves in the foot.
Seriously disillusioned when the Replacements fired Peter, because they owed Peter everything.
He lived the Replacements and really was that kind of seminal influence to them.
You know, if he's in your corner, he's in your corner. And it seems to me that they could have grown, you know, with him.
Would they have lasted? Would they have gone anywhere? Would they have succeeded? Would we be sitting here right now if Peter wouldn't have existed? No, not a chance.
It's over. The developing's over. This thing's done. Put a fork in it. You know, it's industry now.
Pleased to Meet Me, in essence, tells the tale of the Replacements right there. You know, if you just look at that record cover, it tells the tale. And I think everyone understood that, you know, and they were to be that aware of it, to be that aware of, okay, here we are. We're this major label rock band. We've kicked out one of our brothers. We're getting bigger, but are we getting better? And are we looking in the mirror and looking at a bunch of schmucks?
I'm not sure what about Pleased to Meet Me really appealed to me so much. I think it's such a wonderful set of songs. You know, like all the other albums had a little bit of fooling around on them, which is appealing. But I thought Pleased to Meet Me fooled around the least of all their 8 records. Somehow they pulled it off without Bob. I don't know how. I think this songwriting was so good, and I think they were just so inspired making a record with, you know, Dickinson.
I was really surprised at how great Pleased to Meet Me was when I heard it, you know, because I kind of expected to not love it, you know. Like any band, when you start changing the lineup, you just kind of get a feeling of like, you know, they're not going to be as good.
Yeah.
But I mean, some of my favorite songs are on Pleased to Meet Me, and it's a great record.
Pleased to Meet Me is my favorite Replacements record.
Pleased to Meet Me was my favorite album.
Pleased to Meet Me. Pleased to Meet Me.
It's a raw rock and roll album, you know, a la the Rolling Stones and things like that.
The horns and strings and acoustic guitar, all that stuff was fleshing out. It wasn't selling out. It was just like, we're going to try this because let's try this. Let's try the saxophone and let's try, you know, the horns doing the riff at the end of Can't Hardly Wait.
I was a big advocate for Can't Hardly Wait with the horns. I don't know, at the time, I did not know how anybody thought the Replacements were going to go to Memphis and make a record with Jim Dickinson and not have horns on it. I was appalled that people had so little knowledge of music history that the horns insulted them.
I'm one of the people who actually loves the horns on Can't Hardly Wait, which is... That wasn't the first song by them I loved. Color Me Impressed was the first song, but the one that really made me know, like, this is going to be one of my favorite bands ever was Can't Hardly Wait.
Favorite song is Can't Hardly Wait.
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 Can't Hardly Wait is absolutely my favorite drop dead replacement song.
It seemed like the sky was the limit and they were going to put out another 10 albums and each one would continue to evolve. That's what I had hoped and expected.
I think one of the hardest things about the Replacements was that I think they never knew exactly what their charm was. But they knew that it had to do with the fact that they didn't give a shit. And that they were having fun and it was about having fun.
I think I tried to ask them some questions, and I'm not sure if I got any real answers. Well, I noticed that something was amiss, right, and that they looked really peculiar. Later on, what I realized, what was so odd about them is that for the occasion, they had all shaved their eyebrows off.
And then apparently they painted some on that were higher than they normally would have been, so they all looked surprised.
And they would do stuff like this, you know, and you know, good luck to the casual fan. It's like, ooh, I want to like these guys. You know, I like rock and roll, you know. And you see these guys with shaved eyebrows. It's like, no, they gave the casual fan nothing to latch onto unless they were, you know, really predisposed.
I read an article, and I can remember exactly the article. It was in the September 1987 issue of Cream magazine. And I bought it because my favorite band at the time, Fleetwood Mac, was on the cover. And this is like Tango in the Night era of Fleetwood Mac. This tells you how like out of it I was, you know. And so I bought that and I was reading through that and I came across this article on this band called Replacements. And what struck me was just how ugly they were. I mean, that really it was surprising, you know. Westberg was wearing bright orange pants and bright green shoes that he'd drawn like a dollar sign on. And his teeth were all bad. That kind of freaked me out a little bit. You know, I thought bands they didn't look like that. You know, they're supposed to look like Glass Tiger or something like that, you know.
How old were you at the time?
I was about 14. And I remember I didn't like that. I thought they just looked like a bunch of clowns. And I was sort of like kind of offended by that, but curious. And so they were raving about, you know, Pleased to Meet Me. So I had my mom like drive me to like the mall, you know, and I got like the cassette tape of it and I brought it home and I put it on my boom box, my little JCPenney boom box I had like on my toy chest. And that was it. It sounds cheesy, but there was something that just kind of clicked, that clicked on. Like I'd been like a sleeper, and something was touched off. You know, something in my code, in my DNA, something went off like that. And then that was it. I just started listening to them all the time. Like every day. I would come home from school and listen to that album. And that was like my after school activity. For the longest time I thought like Pleased to Meet Me was like their only album. I didn't know anything about them because you couldn't find out about them. I was talking about them in my math class, my geometry class. And no one in my school listened to Replacements. Nobody did. And my geometry teacher, Mr. Olson, heard me and said, yeah, I like the Replacements too. He was like the only person in school was the geometry teacher, you know, and he was this weird guy. And he made me a tape. It was Tim, and the second side was Let It Be, and he left Gary's Got a Boner off. Because I maybe assumed like if my mom found it, he'd get like fired or something like that. Yeah. Which somehow like really made it like personal. Mm-hmm. You know, like I didn't know about that song till like years later, this hidden track, which wasn't hidden for anyone but me. I lived on this farm, and we were sort of in the middle of nowhere. I did start kind of pretending like I knew them a little bit. Mm-hmm. I started pretending that they were, you know, kind of friends, but kind of like older brothers, you know. And I would talk to them, and specifically Tommy, because I think just because he was younger, mm-hmm. He was closer to my age, yeah. And he looked cooler, and he had the better hair, so he was sort of like, he was the big brother I didn't have, and I'd kind of run things run things by like the Tommy in my mind, you know?
Yeah.
Like how would he dress? And what would he say? And how would he approach this girl or something like that? I don't know. He just was sort of with me. I'd kind of walk around the farm and it's a farm, you know, it's like as far away from the replacements as you could get, but I could sort of see him there. I knew it wasn't real, but I can honestly say I spent more time with them than anyone else growing up. I spent more time listening to Please Meet Me than talking to any friend I ever had.
I was listening to Tim and Let It Be like every day because I would come home from high school and hate myself, but then listen to the music and it just really spoke to me. So it's kind of helped me become who I am. So yeah.
What was it specifically about music?
It's the lyrics. It's his whole perception of it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay to be the loser, and it's okay to just to be yourself, and it doesn't matter and who gives a shit. So, you know, it kind of built my personality and my character from there is just learning to believe in yourself and being okay with who you are. And being imperfect is okay.
They absolutely did that. They kind of came in and made me feel less lonely. Made me feel less lonely, less of a freak, less of a weird, shy little kid on a farm in the middle of nowhere, which is pretty much what I was, you know.
And relating to those feelings and knowing, I guess, not feeling alone too, that this person knows how this feels and it's really personal and pretty amazing. It's kind of like, wow, that song's about me, or I know how that feels to be invisible. I always feel my uncoolness all the time. Like I don't fit in. And part of me wants not to care, but part of me does care. And I think that's when you listen to the songs and you, like even when Paul will talk, you know that they get that. You know, it's like, I'm not cool and I don't care, but I do care. Oh, I don't care, screw it. It's like, I think that's what it is for me. I never felt like I fit in. I was always not even like so weird that you take notice, but so weird that nobody would notice. Like invisible. We meet people from high school and they don't even remember me. It was like I wasn't even there. And that's a little bit sad, but you know, is life worth it? My parents don't understand me. I hate my friends. I don't even know if they like me. You know, what's my purpose in life?
You know, and it does change your life. It makes you feel like, you know what? I'm not what all the kids at school that are cool say I am. I'm not a loser. Like, there are other people that feel the same way, and maybe I am a loser, but I'm the best looking loser ever. You know, and that's Tommy Stinson. That's Paul Westerberg. Those are the guys. We're the coolest losers you're ever gonna meet.
The Replacements, to a degree, embodied that because you had this, you know, a janitor, a crazy drunk, and a little kid come together in this band, and it was really effective. It was a different slice of that, like, weirdo pie.
If it had been for them, I don't know. Maybe I would have discovered Morrissey, but the whole like farm Morrissey thing that's not going to work. So there's something about them. They were sort of Morrissey for the Midwest.
Yeah. You know, the 80s were a really difficult time if you were a young person in this country. You know, you felt like you were going to be in a nuclear war because we had a freaking lunatic in the White House.
And the drugs were being taken away,
yeah.
Right? The joy of the drugs. And, you know, we suddenly couldn't even fuck anymore because it was potentially lethal. And on top of it all, you had the motherfucking baby boomers consistently getting in your face and saying, nothing you ever see in your life is going to be nearly as good as the Beatles. Nothing you ever experience will be nearly as good as Woodstock. To which, you know, you and I were responding, fuck you, we just saw the Replacements.
I never got to see them live.
I've seen the band 3 times.
A total of 7 times.
Probably like 8.
8 or 9 times.
What about 10 times? 10, 12 times.
Probably about 15.
20, 25?
Probably seen the Replacements 25 times.
26.
30.
30 times?
Maybe more.
30 to 40.
I want to say 60.
80. God, maybe 100 and more, think about it.
Oh, I'm sure a couple hundred.
And I've worked with bands and,
you know, have loved, you know, fallen in love with bands and bought every record and done all that stuff since then. But none have I ever like felt compelled to like go see 300 times.
And I just remember walking in, and Paul was sitting in there, and I sat down next to him, and we both just looked completely miserable, and he just went, "Drink." And that was where it started, and it just kept going, and it never stopped. You know, by the time we got up to play to open the show, we were all a total train wreck. Probably about 20 minutes or half hour into our set, we were just completely falling apart and totally inept, and the Replacements just came up on stage and took our instruments and started playing, and I think it was the sort of Silent Night, Hey Good Looking medley, and I think that was the end of our set, pretty much. It was really awful. I can't remember if it was before they went on or after, but we were going insane in the dressing room, and Paul went running across the room to do a Tarzan thing and leaped up to grab the chandelier, and the chandelier came out of the ceiling completely, and he landed flat on his back. It was pretty ugly. The dressing room was up on the second floor, and at some point we all took the couch out of the dressing room and threw it, managed to get it through the window and drop it 2 stories down onto the sidewalk. Just, you know, eight guys being complete fucking idiots. That's all it was. Yeah. But, you know, musically it was not a banner night, that's for sure. I've never heard of anybody saying, you know, that was really a great show. Nobody's taken that stance.
I gotta admit this though, the first time I heard Don't Tell a Soul, I got a copy of it for my birthday, and we were sitting in our friend's apartment, and we were all drunk and fucked up, and I opened up and tore it open and like put it in the CD player, and I heard it, and I pushed the eject button, put it back in the case, and threw it out the window. And I was like, no way, this is not the Replacements.
I found that the Replacements were making a record. So I called Stephen Baker and I said, you know, I'm really interested in doing this because I'm a big fan of the band. He's like, you know, I'm really excited that you're excited, but you don't have a track record. They worked with Tony Berg, and depending on who you speak to, he either quit or was fired. So anyway, so along the line, I would call up, you know, Stephen Baker at Warner Bros. Like, hey, you know, I heard Tony Berg's not on the project. You know, can I do it? And then he'd say something like, well, actually, they're meeting with Scott Litt, you know, who did all the REM stuff for us, and we're hoping this will work out, but we'll keep you posted. From what I hear, this is of course third-party information, they met with Scott Litt and ended up duct taping him to a chair, and he basically said, you know, I'm not interested. So I was just really perseverant. I had always felt that they were a fantastic band. I always thought that Paul was this kind of really incredible songwriter, and you know, he obviously was working within the confines of a really kind of a scrappy punk band, and to me that dichotomy was really interesting.
How long did you guys record for?
Too damn long.
I honestly still say that Don't Tell a Soul is my favorite. But I think that there's something to be said for the music that you listen to between the ages of like 13 and 20. I mean, you never quite get over that.
For the first 2 weeks of that project, I went home to my then girlfriend, Lisa, and I just said, I'm going to quit this thing. And it was really a difficult situation for me because here's an opportunity to be established as a producer, work with a well-known band, but every day was just so bone-crushingly difficult, you know.
It's a record that I, over the years, have come to like a lot more than I did at the time. I think I was a little shocked by the degree to which restraint had entered the Replacements' life. And I don't know that I was prepared to accept them as grown-ups.
I hired this engineer, Bev Jones, and you know, so we started making this record. And I think it was by Wednesday they wanted us to go out drinking with them. We went out to the Rainbow Room, and again, I'm really a teetotaler, so I went out there. Okay, we'll hang out with these guys, and their whole idea is that if you drink, you'll let down your guard, and you'll really become real with each other. And so we sit down. I'm sitting with Tommy, and he takes a magic marker and he puts it right on the knee of my jeans. I'm like, oh man, come on. And he takes it and just draws it right over my favorite shirt and down across my pants. I'm like, this is not happening. So then I took, of course I had to draw on him because that's part of the ritual, I guess. But the next day, Bev Jones showed up late, and I could tell by the look on his face that was it. And he walked in, he said, I'm done. So I ended up not only producing, but I ended up engineering this project. And I think I was kind of the common enemy. I mean, I certainly had that feeling. I mean, I'm not exaggerating how many times that I was, you know, threatened.
So it was their first attempt to do
a perfect album and a unified album, the unified sound, and that's not the Replacements. That's not what they do best. I mean, forget the production, though maybe you really can't forget the production.
Fuck the production. Who cares about the production? When you got a song like Aching to Be on there, and you're gonna bitch because there's too much reverb on it? Yeah, there's too much reverb on it. It was 1987. Everyone was using way too much reverb.
Well, Aching to Be is the best. I mean, it's the best song. Hands down. It's the best written song, and it's a stunning performance. And that is just, that to me, that's kind of one of those highlights of working with the band. I mean, that Aching to Be is one of the reasons why you hang on for all the crap. It was really kind of the beginning of, at least somewhere along the vanguard of alt country. And the fact that those guys were able to get there and do it well before other bands. And they also had the backbone to do it, because I think it would have been really easy to not have included Here Comes a Regular, or not have included, Aching to Be, because it wasn't the Replacements, or it wasn't punk rock. And it's interesting that record, I had some friends who were friends of various bands, and I tell you, I tested a lot of friendships when they heard that record. A lot of people didn't like that record at all. They were just really upset. It's not a Replacements record. Really love the Replacements, and you basically ruined them. I was like, oh man, come on.
It was a fucking great record. And for reasons that maybe are hard to articulate, but I'm a big fan of bands' sellout records for some reason, because I feel like you get glimpses into people at those times that can be not good, but you can also see that, I know you're trying awfully hard here to break the mold.
Paul and I had talked about making a classic record that's had a sound that you couldn't pinpoint what era it came from. And we had always moved in that direction. All the rough mixes I'd done, which weren't stunning by any stretch of the imagination, but they kind of continued the aesthetic we were working on the record. And I think at the record label, in an attempt to bring them more towards the masses, enlisted Chris Rodalgi, so he'd mix it in a certain way that, for me, while it worked at that time, it sounds like the end of the 80s to me. Chris Rodalgi put a lot of like chorus on the guitars. There's a kind of a syrupy, smeary thing.
All added after.
Oh yeah, that was all added after. We didn't track with that stuff. So that's what I'm saying. We made a classic record. In Chris's defense, not everything was in the best of tune. So I think it was easier to kind of make it more palatable by putting chorusing on it. So that made it so that people couldn't really tell, oh, wow, this guitar's kind of out of tune. It was just like, there it is. Look, this all goes back to decisions that the band and I made, and specifically the band. I mean, I remember on a couple of songs where, Paul plays guitar part, and I'd be like, oh, wow, that's a really cool part. Like, let's tune your guitar up and play a little more in time, And Paul would be like, I forgot the chords, which is basically like, fuck you. It's done. As much as we want to blame Chris and say, I wish we'd done it differently, and he's like, I'm trying to make it so that more people will want to buy it, because we need to make it more accessible or palatable or understandable.
I mean, it was very obvious that Warner Brothers wanted a commercial release, and they thought that LBU was going to be a huge hit, to the point where they pressed up way too many, and the album ended up in the cutouts. But that was the only one that ever did.
If Don't Tell a Soul were not as produced as it was, I don't know that it would have been on the radio, to tell you the truth.
Probably.
So I'm really happy that it was, because that introduced me to the band.
I wouldn't change a thing, except for I would love to have heard it mixed the way that Paul and I want it to be mixed. And that if we had a chance to do that, that would be great. Because I think we would have made a classic record that would have been even more stunning.
Don't Tell a Soul, as soon as you drop the needle on it, or whatever we do these days, you knew it was sort of over. That this was a band, the band formerly known as The Replacements.
When I saw them at the end, I saw them, the tour they opened for Tom Petty. It was the one time I saw the band where I thought, this is actually kind of boring, because they had sort of become a little more professional, and they weren't as risky, they weren't as edgy. It was still good, but it lost that specialness. I mean, it was sort of like, having Slim Dunlop, you could see why they wanted him. He's a solid player, but the lunatic edge that Bob brought to the band was sort of missed.
The Replacements were a hard band to bring somebody to go see for the first time, saying, hey, you got to go see these guys. I love this band, right? But you didn't know what you're going to get. Yeah. And then somehow you'd always be in that position of trying to say, oh, no, this is cool. They're playing all these covers. This is cool. And people would be looking at you like, Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if all of the, the crazy stunts, playing your worst shows when the record people are there, if it was self-defense, because if you're laying yourself bare in front of an audience, you need a defense mechanism. Was that it? Was it fear of success? Was it fear of being exposed? I don't know.
There's something about the songs, the music, obviously, the guitar, the bass, and drum, but also something about Westerberg's voice. Something about, it's not just what he says, it's how he says it. Something even as simple as like his vocabulary, his phrasing. When he takes a breath or something while he's singing, there's something about that rhythm that felt like almost exactly like the voice inside my own head.
I think we all knew we were just living in his crooked shadow.
Westerberg's genius is that he knew not to be neat. Westerberg's genius was that he joined Bob Stinson's band. And so there was always this sense of impending chaos, and therefore his ability to capture a certain kind of distinctly adolescent alienation is pretty much unparalleled. I don't think anybody ever did it better.
What made Paul also relatable is I think he could go either way, and he could be the biggest dick, he could be the sweetest guy, he could be the guy punching you in the mouth for saying something off, that struck him as off, and then he could kill you with this like heart-wrenching song where you felt like he was singing your life to you. And I've seen shows where it's gone from those kind of extremes all in like, the space of an hour or like even the space of a song sometimes. And that's what was really powerful about it. It wasn't just, if it had just been chaos and we're here to rip shit up and we're here to, get drunk and play sloppy covers, that would have been fine for like a year or two. But it was like, there was a deeper sense of, he was living through the same shit we were.
As we say, he's a nice bunch of guys. To understand him, you have to have an appreciation and a love for dichotomy. And because every human facet that you can have, he's got both of them. I've seen him be very selfish. I've seen him be unbelievably generous. I've seen him literally hand the coat off of his back to someone on the street who was cold and needed a coat.
They all saw this halo around Westerberg somewhere in 81, 82 that I didn't see. They knew this was going to happen. Oh, yes, I knew right from the beginning Paul was going to be destined to, all bullshit.
He told me, well, one of the issues I had early on and lack of confidence in my own songwriting was that the other guys would make fun of him for writing sensitive songs.
And I asked him about, who writes the music. And Paul said, well, I write the music. And then behind me I hear, yeah, if you can call it that.
But you saw what happened to him when he didn't have that chaos around him, and he was sort of allowed to indulge the other side, maybe to, an extreme that he wouldn't have done if Bob Stinson had still been around.
That record sounds like the soundtrack to the death of a band and maybe the death of the leader of the band. You know what I mean? It's just so damaged and so desperately, just sounds like he's on his last leg. I really like the record. Maybe there's more throwaways on it, but the high points. The song All Shook Down is fantastic. Happy Town, Merry-Go-Round, and Someone Take the Wheel. Oh my God, when I heard that, I was like, this guy's in trouble. He's in trouble.
When I got the All Shook Down album and just read the credits and saw how many people were on the record that were not members of the Replacements, it seemed like it was the end of the story.
And I love the last record. I love All Shook Down, even though it's not really, it's mainly just Paul. But I love every song on that record. It really, and at that time, I remember when it came out too, that I think everybody in my circle of friends kind of had already jumped ship.
It was sad to see this slow demise, and then when was it the last record that it was basically
solo record for Paul, which I liked. I personally liked it. Like I said, I was a fan, and I was going to go down with the Titanic.
Basically, the band was now half of what the Replacements were originally. And you almost got the impression that that half was broken in half, too. So, I mean, you know, if you're going to burn that bright, I guess you burn out.
I get in the car, turn on the radio, and the DJs are saying, we think the Replacements have just broken up on stage.
Their story is very similar to the Velvet Underground. And even the whole cliche about everyone who liked them picked up a guitar, I think in some respects it's the same with the Replacements.
The risk of sounding cheesy and cliche, the Replacements changed my life, and I know I'm not alone. You can talk to bands like, say, Craig Finn, or the Goo Goo Dolls, or Gaslight Anthem.
Well, I think that they really, like I said, they sort of made me believe as a teenager in Minneapolis that I could be in a band.
For me, it was just like a paradigm shift. Like, it was just like, whoa. It was like, you know, my perspective on music and the world and everything changed in like literally like a moment. Like I finally found a band that I could completely relate to and make my own.
I remember I used to play at a cafe, and that's kind of how I learned how to play. And it was like an open mic night that they would do every Thursday. And I would go and I learned Androgynous on the guitar, and I would sing it. And it was, you know, the most simplified version of it ever, but I would play it because I loved it so much, and I was 15, I think, 95. And there was this older girl who was like maybe 23 at the time, and I don't even remember her name. But I remember she was the only one who knew what I was talking about. Came up to me at the end of the night and was like, "That's the Replacements." And I was like, "Oh my gosh! Like, check this girl out talking to me because of the Replacements song that I don't even know what it means, but I like it, you know." And I was like, you know, when I was 15, I have a 23-year-old guy. I was like, yeah, you know, I'm Hugh Hefner now. Like, look at me. The Replacements did a good job for me.
Matthew Ryan is another guy that I would say when I look at people who were influenced by the Replacements, because he's just as tortured. He's just as dark.
It made me want to tell the truth in a way that was beautiful. And if it wasn't beautiful, maybe it should be ugly, you know?
But they weren't afraid to write about being insecure and having a broken heart. And that, to me, is the basis of what emo rose out of.
The Replacements are kind of, in a way, the great existential heroes of American indie rock music.
When I heard that music, I thought that they had a gift that maybe they weren't supposed to have, and that's a really cool thing in the art world.
It made playing music seem more doable. You know, you didn't have to be a studied performer. You didn't have to know your scales. You didn't really have to know chords that well. You didn't even know how to tune your guitar that well. It could be a little out of tune and that would be fine.
The file was named Color Me Sedated. It was I Want to Be Sedated by the Ramones and Color Me Impressed by Replacements. Tweety introduces the song on stage by saying everything we do is based on the Replacements.
I don't think anybody could have been the Replacements, and I don't think maybe you could think that it looks easy.
I think every young band wants to be the Replacements, but they'll never be that because there's only one Replacements. It's not going to happen.
It's hard to think of an alternative rock band in the 90s that didn't sound exactly like the Replacements.
Nirvana's record is called Nevermind. I don't think that's a coincidence, you know? I think it's one of the greatest songs on Pleased to Meet Me.
If you put Replacements and Whisker Du in a blender, you'd have like 90% of the Seattle scene. When I was working with Nirvana, some of those conversations were like, they were, you know, let's just be as big as the Replacements. That's awesome, you know? But then realizing like, oh, they really weren't that big. They didn't have commercial success. You know, we worshiped Paul Westerberg and we saw him on Saturday Night Live and thought, oh my God, the world gets it. But really the world didn't get it.
The Replacements had a lot to do with why I even started playing music at all.
We were much more immediately and deeply influenced by the Replacements.
When we started playing together, that's all we wanted was to be the Replacements, you know? But it was all about them, man. I mean, and hearing that music, I can't believe how bad we ripped that band off on our first couple of records. It's pretty incredible.
When we were starting out, people used to always ask us if we wanted to be the Beatles of comedy. I think it was Kevin McDonald who first responded. He said, no, we'd rather be the Replacements of comedy.
There was no way I was going to have any success. There was no way I was going to make it out of there alive. And, you know, just seeing one person get out that you knew, one group of guys that, you know, just pulled it together and made a little bit of history, gave you hope that maybe if I could pull it together, that there's something out there that I could do.
What the Replacements really did, though, was they kind of helped invent college rock. You know, that whole college left of the dial, you know, kind of basically industry, you know, that allowed thousands of bands to get radio airplay.
If you haven't heard Let It Be and you haven't heard, you know, Pleased to Meet Me, you're missing out a huge part of that connects things like Bob Dylan or the punk movement to modern music today. It's like not studying any of the wars in American history. Like you don't know how exactly you got here. You know you got here, but you don't know why.
They're one of those bands that became much, much cooler and well-known after they had disintegrated. And I swear to God, I have met thousands of people that are like, yeah, I saw the Replacements. I'm like, I didn't see you there. I didn't see you. Where were you? Where were all these people? It's like 50 million people claim to have seen the Replacements, but they weren't there, you know, and that's part of the mythology.
They might not have, you know, become famous, but they're infamous. And I think that probably worked for them even better.
They were a glorious mess. You know, that's what they were. You got to listen to these records. I mean, you know, perhaps some of their commercial success that eluded them was because a lot of people couldn't figure out who the hell they were.
Yeah. Or maybe they were a very strong spice that most people who eat McDonald's would never be able to stomach. Maybe the Replacements were too good to be that popular.
Their albums are like, they're like family. You know, I can love them because of their flaws. Mm-hmm. You know, another band, it's like, you know, U2 or R.E.M. or Dead Milkmen or whatever the hell, I can be like, well, this is a good song, this is a bad song. With them, it's like, it's something else. Mm-hmm. It's like, you know, when you see like your kid or a niece or a nephew or something play a school concert and it sucks. It doesn't matter.
But this was really the Phoenix. This was the Phoenix. And we didn't know it. We really didn't know it at the time. We did not know. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what we had.
It's always about timing. How those guys met, how music needed them at that exact moment in time, and they did exactly what we all had hoped. And we were a little selfish about the fact that we got it and no one else did.
I mean, they were just a rock and roll band, you know, but also weren't the Rolling Stones just a rock and roll band? The sum of the parts of a band is what makes them special. And for whatever reason, as opposed to some other band in Minneapolis, this particular grouping of these four particular people produced the sort of, you know, sparks colliding, atoms smashing, whatever, that produced this attitude that runs in their music.
We are fortunate to have artists who come along very rarely in our lifetimes. You know, Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles, and the Replacements, I think, is one of these acts. So very unique, very fragile and precious.
Even to this day, I don't know. It's hard for me to talk about whether they're good or not. And sometimes it's even hard for me to talk about whether I like them or not, or if they're just simply such a part of me. Mm-hmm. You know, like it's hard for me to talk. Do I like my parents? Do I like this? Do I like Minnesota? Do I like Oxygen? And I wonder how much of it is them and like if they hadn't come along, I think we would have had to invent them somehow.
Why does the soul of rock and roll find a place to live in the Twin Cities?
To me, it's like Minneapolis was this very exotic place, as exotic as London was.
I guess I've been that fan where I've been the guy, you know, drunk in Minneapolis after one of my gigs, you know, driving around trying to find the house from Let It Be, or the, you know, the bar, CC Bar, where supposedly Paul wrote "Here Comes a Regular."
It was like the Emerald City, man. It was like the shining city on the hill.
First time we went to Minneapolis, we were staying with some people at the Ron Westy Run house. Actually,
Yeah.
we were staying, and I remember we picked up the phone book, and
Yeah.
and John opened up the phone book and found Westerberg's name in the phone book, and we were like, "Oh my God, his name's in the phone book! Like he was such a big rock star." We were
Yeah,
like,
so I called the number, and I go, like, "Hello, is this Paul Westerberg?" And the guy's like, "Yeah." I go, "Is this the Paul Westerberg that wrote Otto?" And then he just hung up. And I'm like, "It's got to be him. It's got to be him. That's him."
That's what he would have done.
Yeah, that's what he would have done.
You know, there's a Canadian punk musician, Art Bergman. He's great. And he was once asked to describe what made music, especially, you know, punk music, so good. And he said, you know, what's really difficult about it is that to get something that matters, it's like you're leaning off the edge of a cliff and taking a piss at the same time. You can't sustain it forever, and you need a little bit of reckless disregard for yourself. But you know that going into it if you want to create something meaningful. And what I think is extraordinary about the Replacements is that they seem to be able to maintain that balancing act of willful disregard for themselves and came up with something that was very real and that was very unique for really a very long period of time, because there's a short shelf life once you start leaning off of a cliff.
They weren't really punk rock. They were just, actually, they're what classic rock should be. When people use the word classic rock, they shouldn't be talking about the fucking Eagles. They should be talking about the Replacements.
For me, greatest band of all time.
For me, the Replacements made my world a better place. If you're a music fan, I think you feel that sense of discovery sometimes, and you feel like, okay, my world now makes more sense. It makes more sense than the moment before I heard this song.
The great thing for me about the Replacements is that there's almost a song for every moment, you know? There's a song that can be played at a wedding, there's a song that can be played at a funeral.
They were capable of changing your mood, your mental state, possibly your DNA at that point in your life.
Certain records like Exile, those 3 Dylan records, you know, Bringing It All Back Home and Highway 61 and Blonde on Blonde, and those Replacements records. I mean, if you were trying to explain to a Martian what rock and roll is, those are the records that you would play them.
I didn't go to the Replacements because I thought rock history was being made. I went because it was full of mystery, suspense, and sometimes magical, transcendent moments.
It's an indefinable quality, and they had it up the ass.
You can tune a piano, but you can't tune the Replacements.
Spin voted them best band of the decade or something, and John Bon Jovi had that famous quote, "Well, if they're so big, how come I've never heard of them?" I would tell that to the audience, like, they have the negative John Bon Jovi seal of approval.
What I would say to somebody is I would hold the album, I would say, you know, Let It Be, because actually that's the one. I would say, imagine if no one knew who the Beatles were or who the Rolling Stones were, and somebody comes up to you and gives you a Beatles album. So that's what this is. I think it's that good. It's not just an accident.
I thought rock people were people that descended from some mountain, some rock mountain, where Paul Westerberg, Tommy Stinson, Bob Stinson, Chris Martin, they were all believable. Like, not only did I know lots of people that looked like them, I actually would see them sometimes on the street.
And I was thinking with your film that if everyone that watched it gave Let It Be to a 15-year-old, I think that within 5 to 10 years there's going to be 100 new bands because of that.
That notion that anybody can do it, that I'm not special just because I wrote one great song or even 50 great songs. In Westerberg's case, you could do this. You should be doing it. What's stopping you from doing it? I mean, really, if you wanted to do the ultimate homage to the Replacements, you should have visited 50 basements and found out what those kids, who everybody else in the universe hates, or so they think, what kind of noise they're making. That's the Replacement story.
There's not much in this world you can believe in, but when you find something like that that makes your world better, that makes you feel better, that makes sense to you, and is something you can believe in, you hold on to it. And I think that that's what the Replacements will always be to me, something I could believe in.
But music like the Replacements is, you know, about engagement with your own imagination and hope and disappointment, and also ability to fail miserably, you know?
Even though maybe they thought they were like Charlie Brown or whatever, that they were never gonna win, that gave them the power to create all their own rules, which they played by to astonishing effect. You know, so I would say if you're a human being, this is, you know, the best or the most human band. Music for humans. No bands ever deserve that title more than the good old Replacements, I'd say. Music for humans.
The song Answering Machine, if you just read the lyrics, it sounds like this really sensitive poetry. It sounds like he doesn't care if anyone heard it. It sounds like a postcard to himself. And when I heard that, I realized that they had actually captured an emotion there in that song so perfectly. They captured that moment of someone who is there home alone at 3 o'clock in the morning, or out at the bar, or on a street corner, and wishing they could get in touch with this person that they're thinking about.
Well, we did correspond. I mean, he would be on the road, and he would say things like, you know, I can't write on the road because it's all bumpy and stuff, and I want to write, and I think he just wanted to get in touch. I mean, I got to know him before the Replacements got massive. I don't know, our conversations were really good. Sometimes he'd say I was too quiet, sometimes he was too quiet. I don't think we actually got to speak that much, and so, you know, being a pen pal is really great, but it's sort of nicer if you hear the person's voice. And so anyway, one day he left a message on my answering machine, and I had been out a lot because I usually went out about 2 or 3 nights a week. And I just got home, and he just left this really funny message saying, you're never there, and, you know, I hate your answering machine, and, you know, one of these days I'm going to write a song about it, and as you do, and so he did.